Unfortunately, though, Henry, being the busy businessman that he was, couldn't stay with her, and she didn't want to stay by herself. So he left after a couple weeks, and then she ended up following him back. And she seemed to make slight improvement, but then by 1880, the winter of 1880, she was very sick again. So she ended up dying on May 18th, 1881 at the age of 47.
Oh.
So it sounds like she had tuberculosis. And I did see one notation in my research that said she died of consumption. So basically the same thing.
How is that the same thing?
Consumption
I don't know what
and tuberculosis.
Old
consumption was
medical terms.
Right, yeah. Consumption was an early term for tuberculosis. I don't really think they started using the term tuberculosis until well into the 20th century.
Okay. I'm not really sure what tuberculosis is.
Oh, it's basically,
to be honest,
it's the inflammation of the lining of your lungs.
Oh, is it curable?
Now it is, but back then
it wasn't.
It wasn't. You could go into remission.
Okay.
For a while, and so that's kind of where you get the big sanitariums that were built, in the late 19th century, because they believed that mountain air was good and warmer climates were good. So that was kind of basically the only cure that they could give you. And then you would get full on tuberculosis hospitals. We actually had one in Spartanburg, where I grew up.
Did they call them sanitarium, or was that something different?
Sanitariums were a catch-all for hospitals, but yeah, you would get a lot of that's what they would call them.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of it. Is it Waverly Sanitarium, and it's in Kentucky? It's one of the famous ones that's supposed to be very haunted, which makes sense to me since a lot of people died there.
You know Atlas Obscura?
Yeah, I love Atlas Obscura.
So they had Obscura Day, and the medical university, this was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago maybe, they had an exhibit of historic medical stuff. And I feel like part of it was a tuberculosis hospital somewhere. Like they had photographs of it, and then they had lungs. They had tubercular lungs preserved in formaldehyde.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Yeah, it's right here. So this says Pine Haven Sanatorium. It was in Charleston. It was built in 1924. Charleston County Tuberculosis Hospital. So then there was a new tuberculosis hospital erected in 1951. And it replaced the Pine Haven Sanatorium that was built in 1924. Oh, and Simmons and Lapham were the architects.
Oh, okay.
I guess of the old ones. But yeah, so they had cavitary pulmonary tuberculosis. That's a lung.
Yeah.
That's a cross-section of a lung. Sorry, for those that are listening, you can't see.
Yeah.
But it's a lung.
It just it ate the interior of your lungs.
Yes.
And, I mean, you basically suffocated to death.
It's a lung.
It's the one that you generally see in old movies where somebody's coughing blood into a handkerchief. That's consumption.
This was in 2015, and I'm not sure that there's been an Obscura Day since then, but I really enjoyed going to this, and I wish that they would do it again. State Park Sanatorium in Columbia.
Now, that was directly behind the State Historic Preservation Office where I worked.
Really?
Yeah.
I know exactly where that is.
Yeah.
It's not downtown. So that makes sense that it was removed from the downtown.
And it's very creepy. It's abandoned. Well, there are portions of it that are still have DHEC offices in it, but then like the main hospital wards and stuff have been abandoned, and it's very creepy. I used to go up in there all the time just because I'm creepy.
The new Pine Haven, constructed in 1953, cared for Black and white patients, although facilities were segregated. So it was still the same facility. Well, but it's cool because like otherwise it would just be for whites only, and they would have separate. But it was the same facility. They just segregated the patients. Yeah. So at least there was actually care for them. Yeah, and they just didn't refuse to care for them or something. Anyway, so there's your information
on consumption and tuberculosis,
TB consumption, and Obscura Day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. So Henry is now a widower, and he's got 2 children, but the oldest child, Jenny Louise, was recently married, so he didn't necessarily have to worry about her, but he did have an 11-year-old son, Henry, that he was still responsible for. So he invited his half-sister, Carrie, and I have no clue how she figured into the genealogy. I didn't find any other mention of her
half sister, so they shared A parent.
Yeah, a parent, either a mother or a father. So maybe she was younger than him. I don't know. But she came to stay with him and helped to care for her nephew. Many of the biographers state that Mary's death made a profound mark on Henry's life. It sounds like he was kind of a workaholic to that point, which, I mean, would explain why he was so wealthy as a result of that. But he was determined to change that so he could spend more time with his family. So later in 1881, he rented a summer home on Long Island. You won't believe what the name of this place was. Satan's Toe.
No, it wasn't.
Yep. When I say Satan's Toe, it was actually all one word. So
now I'm disappointed.
But the reason it was named that was because it was located on a geographical part of Long Island that was known as Satan's Toe. So I guess they thought it looked better or sounded better. It was all one word. Yeah, you still can't get out of Satan's Toe.
But is it spelled how I think it's spelled?
Yeah. Satanstoe. Yeah. I kept looking at it and I was like, okay.
Is it
Satan's Toe.
Is the pronunciation
Satan's
what we think? Yeah. I was gonna say, is it a different emphasis?
No, it is not. Because Satan's Toe was actually the name of a James Fenimore Cooper novel. So that was written and it took place in this area.
Oh,
so
okay.
That's why. But he ended up buying this house in 1882 and renovated it. It's a 40-room mansion.
Dang, so he was real busy in the 1880s.
He was.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. So he renamed it Lawn Beach because that sounds a lot better.
It does.
But everybody kept calling it by Satan's Toe. So around this time, Flagler began gradually retiring from Standard Oil. His place was taken by a younger, more ambitious man, but he would continue to be one of the largest stockholders of the company and was still on the board of directors. And at the end of the day, the company had made him a wealthy man because he was now worth somewhere between $10 and $20 million.
Sure.
So, of course, a man of Henry Flagler's fortunes does not go unnoticed by the unattached women of the area, particularly those who want to elevate themselves from the gutter. I'm probably being a little mean there. But...
And if you saw the picture.
And Henry wasn't unattractive, even at the age of 51. So, enter Ida Alice Shords. Now, she had been in the picture for a while, as Henry had hired her to nurse his wife Mary when she was ill. Now, the two had remained friends, and I am doing air quotes, following Mary's death, and Henry finally decided to make it official in 1883. Ida Alice, or Alice as she was known, was 35 and Henry was 53.
We're used to that now in these...
I mean, it doesn't really shock us,
with the couples we've talked about, anything less than 20 years is...
Right. It was 18.
Is
so,
okay.
Yeah. That's nothing, man. Only 18 years. So his family was not very happy about this. Even though she had been reared in the home of a clergyman like Henry, she had a rather distasteful history. She had hoped to become an actress originally.
Was she a choir girl?
She was a choir girl, a chorus girl.
Chorus girl. Sorry.
Vastly different chorus girls and choir girls. So she wanted to be an actress, but then discovered that she had no talent. So she turned to plan B, which was become a nurse, because the two are so...
And marry rich.
And marry rich, yeah. So she reportedly was quite beautiful. She had red hair and icy blue eyes. So that seems to be the attraction, because she was not known for her intellectual qualities. She was, however, known for her rather violent and sometimes uncontrollable temper.
Ooh, but apparently, redhead, fiery redhead.
That's true. Henry was aware of this, so he had been warned. So the two were married at Madison Avenue Methodist Church on June 5th, 1883. As Henry was involved in an important business deal, the two did not immediately take a honeymoon. Instead, Alice moved right into the house on 5th Avenue and immediately attempted to become a mother to Henry's son, who was now 13. And as you can imagine, that went over like a lead balloon. Alice also began spending her new husband's money, eagerly filling her closet with the finest clothes in New York. She had a desperate desire to be recognized by the creme of New York society. But
I'm not sure what else she was supposed to do. You marry rich, isn't that the first thing you do? Go shopping?
Pretty much, yeah.
Duh.
So, and like many women before her, she failed utterly in this pursuit. During the winter of 1883-1884, the couple finally took their honeymoon. They ventured to St. Augustine, Florida.
Yep, they did.
Which took a total of 90 hours of travel.
Oh my gosh.
So to put that in perspective, you can probably drive from New York to St. Augustine in about 15 hours nowadays, maybe a little more.
I feel like it would be more.
It would take us 6 hours from upstate South Carolina to St. Augustine.
Okay, sure. It takes about 4, I think, from here to Jacksonville, and St. Augustine's a little bit farther.
It takes
Regardless,
you 4
it doesn't
hours,
take
really?
Yeah.
I guess I drive like a bat out of hell then, because it takes me like 3. Anyway,
well, it doesn't take 90.
No, it does not take 90. The reason for that delay was the fact that the railroads were not standardized in their construction. So the track gauges had to be changed between freight and passenger trains. And unlike today, you can't just flip a switch.
Right.
You have to actually get out and change them. So the plane, they would have to stop.
Manual, sure.
Yeah, all that stuff. So the Flagler stayed in Jacksonville for a few days before moving on to St. Augustine, this time by way of a steamship on the St. Johns River. They found the small city charming, but it had no decent hotels. So several accounts said that nobody really knew where they stayed, but then one account I read said they stayed with his friend at the Villa Zorata.
Yes.
Which is this insane Moorish revival building.
Yes, it's a house. Yeah, I've toured it.
I have too.
So
yeah.
Weird.
It is really weird. I did as a child, and I actually pulled up the website, and it was actually closed from like 2008 to 2014.
Yes, it was.
So I would maybe be interested in going back and seeing it.
I would too, because I think I saw it
before then,
to whatever restoration. Yeah.
That villa was completed by an eccentric businessman named Franklin Smith, who was a friend of Henry's. He was also an amateur architect, so he was the one who was responsible for the building.
So when we get into the hotel I'm about to discuss, the reason that Flagler decided on the construction method is because of the way that Villa Zorata was constructed. It was a form poured concrete, and he was like, "Ooh, this is cool.
Yeah,
let me try this." And so that's why it was used on the
It also
hotel.
had shell. It was
Correct.
concrete and shell.
Coquina.
We had, what we call now coquina, or here in the Low Country we call it tabby. It's the same thing, or is tabby more shell than shell and sand?
I think there's got to be some difference, because also tabby way predated that.
Yeah, I mean that was like one of the really early forms.
That was like 16th century, because when you find tabby
coquina
ruins,
was too. You see a lot of the old buildings in
now
St.
we're gonna have
Augustine.
to figure out what the difference is.
Damn it, Caroline! So Flagler decided that Florida could be the next great tourist attraction, and he began concocting a scheme to bring the masses south. And I'm sure all the future Floridians thanked him for that. In 1885, he purchased the Jacksonville, St. Augustine, and Halifax Railroad and began making plans to build a monumental hotel in St. Augustine. So,
and of course, I'm just so I can identify it quickly. The Wikipedia says coquina is a sedimentary rock that is composed either wholly or almost entirely of transported, abraded, mechanically sorted fragments of the shells of mollusks, trilobites, brachiopods, or other invertebrates. So
it's an actual
coquina is
rock,
naturally occurring rock composed of shell. So like compressed shell.
I'm assuming that they probably cracked it down or made, because you see a lot of walls down in St. Augustine that are made out of coquina. So they figured out some way to turn it into a...
Sure.
And now that makes total sense. You just
and of course, when I Google tabby,
it came up with cats.
It did. So now you will not be hearing about what tabby is, because I'm just too busy looking at cat pictures.
That's right.
Sorry. Not really. I'm not sorry.
Tabby's not tabby's man-made, though, I thought.
Well, I thought so, right? Tabby ruins. Tabby's a concrete. There you go.
Okay.
Yes. Made from crushed oyster shells, lime, sand, and water. So originally the tabby was covered usually with stucco, but today most ruins are exposed oyster concrete. Now, I'm not quite clear on this, because by those definitions, I would say that
coquina predates tabby. Or maybe it's just the same time period. It's just that coquina is naturally occurring.
Historic refers to tabby dating from the 1860s or earlier that was produced by burning oyster shells, not later tabby manufactured by mixing shells with Portland cement or adding shells to stucco. Tabby was first used as a building material in North America around 1580 by the Spanish in St. Augustine, Florida.
Okay.
Tabby, believed to be from the Spanish word tapia for mud wall, declined in popularity when the Spanish discovered coquina, a shell stone that could be quarried. Little tabby survives in St. Augustine. British first began making tabby in the late 1600s, primarily in Beaufort County, an area which has the most tabby structures today. A.
All right. Okay.
So coquina, you can actually quarry, and tabby, you have to make.
So tell us all about Henry Flagler's monumental.